The day Elliot Bowen walked into the Hargrove Grand Hotel, with a duffel bag over one shoulder and mud still on the edge of his work boots, nobody looked twice at him. That was the point. He had driven 4 hours from Atlanta in a rented truck, not the black car service that usually picked him up, not the company SUV with the tinted windows. A truck. A plain, gray rental truck from a lot off the interstate, because Elliot Bowen had learned something over 30 years in this business that most people never figure out until it's too late. You want to know what a place really is. You walk in like you have nothing. The lobby of the Hargrove Grand smelled like eucalyptus and money. Marble floors the color of cream. A chandelier above the check-in desk that probably cost more than the first building Elliot had ever bought. The kind of place where the cushions on the lobby chairs were reupholstered every 18 months, whether they needed it or not, because appearances were not a detail. Appearances were the whole religion. Elliot stood near the entrance for a moment, just taking it in. He was 61 years old, 6 feet, dark skin, close-cut silver at his temples, strong hands that had done real work before they ever signed a real check. He wore dark canvas work pants, a plain olive jacket, and those boots that hadn't been fully cleaned since a site visit in Birmingham 3 weeks ago. No watch on his wrist. The watch was in the duffel. No briefcase. No assistant trailing behind him with a tablet and an agenda. Just a man, standing in a lobby, looking like he wasn't supposed to be there, and that right there was already enough for some people. The front desk had 3 agents working. 2 of them were occupied. The third, a man in his late 30s with a pressed burgundy vest and a name tag that read Cole, front desk supervisor, looked up from his monitor, looked directly at Elliot, and looked back down again. Not a nod, not a 1 moment, sir. Just nothing. Like the man had looked at a piece of furniture and decided it didn't require acknowledgement. Elliot walked to the desk anyway. He set his duffel on the floor and rested both hands on the marble counter. The marble was cold. "Afternoon," Elliot said. Cole didn't look up immediately. He finished whatever he was typing, or pretended to, and then raised his eyes with the particular expression of a man performing patience he did not actually feel. "Can I help you?" The way he said you carried about 40 pounds of meaning. "I have a reservation," Elliot said. "Bowen." Cole typed. Looked at the screen, typed again. The pause was just a beat too long, long enough to be a message. "I'm not finding anything under that name. Try the company block, BRC Holdings." Another pause. Cole's jaw moved slightly, like he was working something over behind his teeth. He turned the monitor just slightly away from Elliot's line of sight, which was a small but deliberate thing to do. "We have a block under BRC," Cole said, "but those rooms are for corporate guests. Is someone expecting you?" Elliot looked at him, not with anger, not yet, with the specific patience of a man who has had this particular conversation more times than he can count, and has learned exactly how much it costs him to lose his composure in the first 30 seconds. "I am the corporate guest," Elliot said. Cole smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who has decided what something is and is not interested in being corrected. "Sir, our corporate rooms are pre-arranged through executive coordination. If you're a vendor or a contractor associated with BRC, you'll want to contact." "I'm not a vendor. The procurement office they can arrange." "I said I'm not a vendor." Elliot's voice was still level, still quiet. That was a discipline he had practiced. "My name is Elliot Bowen. I'm in room 1412. The reservation was made through my office on Monday." Cole looked at him the way certain people look at something they've already decided is a problem. He picked up the desk phone, made a call. Brief, turned slightly away. Hung up. "I'm going to need to ask you to step aside while I verify," he said. "Verify what, exactly?" "Your association with the account." There were other guests behind Elliot now. A couple with rolling luggage. A woman in a blazer checking her phone. None of them had been asked to verify their association with anything. They had walked up and been greeted. Elliot had walked up and become a situation to be managed. He stepped to the side. He waited. He was good at waiting. He had not always been good at it. There was a version of Elliot Bowen from 30 years ago who would have put both hands flat on that counter and made very clear that patience was not something he owed anyone who hadn't earned it. But he was 61 now, and he had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing in the room is the person who doesn't raise his voice, because everyone else raises theirs, and then you can hear exactly who they are. So he waited. The couple checked in. The woman in the blazer checked in. a man in a suit who arrived after all of them checked in. 11 minutes passed. Then Cole came back around the desk. Behind him, and this was new, was a second man. Broder, different color vest, a badge that said Hargrove Grand above a name. Whitfield, guest relations manager. Whitfield was the kind of man who had learned to project authority without ever having actually earned it. He stood with his chin slightly elevated, hands clasped behind his back, which is a posture that communicates I am in charge here, and also, to the trained eye, I am nervous. Misters. He glanced at something in his hand. Bowen, that's right. I understand there's been some confusion about your reservation. There hasn't been any confusion on my end, Elliot said. My office made a reservation. My name is on it. I'd like my key. Whitfield inhaled through his nose. The challenge we're having is that the BRC corporate account is a managed account with specific authorized users, and we need to confirm. I own BRC Holdings, Elliot said. Silence. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, where everyone stops and turns. The quiet, uncomfortable kind where two men realize something has shifted and neither of them is ready to adjust to it. I'm sorry, Whitfield said. BRC Holdings, Bowen Realty and Capital. Elliot said it without any particular theater. He had never needed theater. I founded it in 1997. We currently hold 43 commercial properties across 11 states. One of which, he paused, is this hotel. Whitfield's chin came down about half an inch. Cole, behind him, had gone very still. Elliot reached into the inside pocket of his olive jacket and removed a folded document. He placed it on the desk counter between them. It was a single page, an asset summary, the kind of document that a man only needs to show once. Neither Whitfield nor Cole moved to look at it immediately. That was telling. We acquired the Hargrove Grand 14 months ago, Elliot said. I have a quarterly walkthrough scheduled for tomorrow morning. I came in a day early. He glanced at the counter. I came in like this specifically because I wanted to see how the property operates when management doesn't know the owner is in the building. The lobby did not go quiet. The lobby continued exactly as it was. The faint music, the sound of rolling luggage, the distant clatter from the restaurant off the east corridor. The world didn't stop for this moment. It never does. But Whitfield's face did something complicated, something that moved through several emotions very quickly, the way a person's face does when they are doing arithmetic and not liking the answer they keep getting. Mr. Bowen, he started. Don't, Elliot said. Not cruelly, just clearly. I've been standing here for 14 minutes. I watched 3 guests check in behind me without anyone asking them to verify a single thing. One of your staff members implied I was a contractor. The other one called up to someone, I'm guessing security or a manager, to make sure I was who I said I was. He looked at Cole when he said that. Cole looked at the floor. That's not a training issue. That's a culture issue. And culture comes from the top. He picked up the asset summary from the counter and folded it back into his jacket pocket. I'm going to need that key, he said. Room 1412. And tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I'd like both of you in the conference room on the 4th floor. Along with whoever you called when I was standing over there. A young woman had appeared at the other end of the desk. She had been working the back office, apparently. She was maybe 25, small, with a hijab and a name tag that read Diana. She had not been part of any of this, but she had clearly heard enough of it to understand what was happening, and when she looked at Elliot, she didn't look away. She held his gaze for a moment with an expression that wasn't pity and wasn't quite apology. It was more like recognition, the look of someone who has been on the other side of exactly this kind of counter and knows what it costs. Elliot acknowledged her with a nod. She went to the system, typed something, and slid a key card across the counter. Room 1412, Mr. Bowen, she said. Elevators around the corner to the left. Is there anything else I can get for you tonight? Just the room, Elliot said. Thank you, Diana. He picked up his duffel. He walked to the elevator. He did not look back at Whitfield or Cole, because he had already looked at them enough, and there was nothing more he needed to see. The elevator doors opened. He stepped in. The doors closed behind him. And in the lobby of the Hargrove Grand, 2 men stood in the particular silence of people who have just understood something that cannot be undone. Elliot had not grown up with anything. That is not a figure of speech. There is a specific kind of not having that people sometimes romanticize from a distance. The humble beginnings, the bootstraps, the narrative arc that makes poverty sound like the first act of a movie instead of just the constant, grinding, daily experience of not having enough. Elliot Bowen's childhood in Macon, Georgia was not the first act of a movie, it was just his life. A mother who worked 2 jobs. A father who left when Elliot was 9 and who Elliot had stopped being angry at around age 40 because anger takes energy and he had finally decided to spend his energy on other things. He had gotten into real estate by accident. He had been 28, working in a shipping warehouse, when a friend of a friend told him about a small commercial property near downtown Atlanta that was going for less than it should because the seller needed to close fast. Elliot had $11,000 saved. The property cost $47,000. The gap between those 2 numbers seemed impossible until he sat down with a man at a credit union who actually looked at the numbers instead of just looking at Elliot and who told him the deal made sense. He closed on that property in March of 1994. He sold it 14 months later for 3 times what he paid. That was the moment. Not a speech, not a mentor, not a revelation. Just a number. A number that told him the framework he'd been handed about what was possible for someone like him was simply wrong. Not difficult. Not a long shot. Wrong. And once he understood that, there was no version of him that could go back to the warehouse. BRC Holdings now employed 340 people. It had offices in Atlanta, Charlotte, and Chicago. It owned apartment complexes, retail centers, a logistics facility in Tennessee, and as of 14 months ago, a boutique hotel group that included the Hargrove Grand in Nashville, the kind of property that Whitfield probably thought would never have an owner who looked like the man he'd just tried to send away. Elliot showered. He ordered room service, a club sandwich and iced tea, and ate it standing at the window looking at the Nashville skyline going gold in the early evening light. He called his daughter, Renee, who asked how the room was. Eventful, he said. "Daddy, I'm fine, baby. What happened?" he told her. Not with drama, not with bitterness, just the way he always told stories, which was plainly and completely. The way you tell something when you've processed it enough to just let it sit there on its own, without having to dress it up or soften it. Renee was quiet for a moment when he finished. "Are you going to fire them?" she asked. "I'm going to find out who they are first," he said. "All of them. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now." He hung up and stood at the window a while longer. Not because he was sad. Not because he was angry, exactly. Anger had come and gone in the elevator, the way it usually did, quick and hot, and then replaced by something quieter and more deliberate. He stood at the window because Nashville was beautiful in this light, and the Hargrove Grand had good windows, and he had bought this building, and he was allowed to stand here and look at it and feel whatever he felt. He finished the sandwich. He went to bed. Tomorrow was going to be a long day. The conference room on the 4th floor had a long oval table, high-backed chairs, and a view of the parking structure. It was the kind of room built for conversations nobody wants to have. At 8:47 in the morning, Elliot's chief of operations, a woman named Sandra Greer, arrived from Atlanta with a leather portfolio and the expression of someone who had been briefed on the situation and had prepared accordingly. At 8:59, Whitfield arrived. At 9:01, Cole arrived, which was enough of a message in itself. And behind Cole, unexpectedly, came Diana, the young woman from the front desk. She was not on any list Elliot had made. She had been brought, it seemed, by someone's instruction, and she sat at the far end of the table with her hands folded and her eyes steady. Elliot let Sandra open. She was good at openings. She laid out the timeline of the previous evening, factual, sequenced, undramatic. The reservation that was in the system, the 14-minute wait, the guests who had checked in without incident while a property owner stood to the side. The call that had been made during that wait, which Sandra had already confirmed through the hotel's internal log, went to the assistant security manager, not to any guest relations protocol. Whitfield started to speak twice and stopped twice. Cole said nothing. He sat with his hands flat on the table and stared at a spot about 2 feet in front of him, like a man doing the math on his own decisions. When Sandra finished, Elliot spoke. "I'm going to ask some questions," he said. "I'd like honest answers, not managed ones. Managed answers will take longer and get us to the same place." He looked at Whitfield first. "When you came out to the desk last night, what did you think was happening?" Whitfield cleared his throat. "We received a report from the front desk that there was a guest who couldn't be verified on the account." "That's not what I asked. I asked what you thought was happening." A pause. The kind of pause that means someone is deciding between 2 versions of the truth. "I thought," Whitfield said slowly, That there might be an unauthorized person attempting to access a corporate account. Based on what? Another pause, shorter this time, the report from Cole. Elliot turned to Cole. Cole looked up from his spot on the table. "I'll be honest," Cole said. And to his credit, to the single thin credit that Elliot was willing to give him in that moment, he sounded like he actually meant it. "I made an assumption when I saw you come in, before you said anything. I made an assumption about who you were and what you were doing here. And then when you said you had a reservation, I didn't recalibrate. I just looked for a way to make the assumption fit." Nobody said anything. "I know what that is," Cole said. "I know what to call it. So do I," Elliot said. He let that sit for a moment. He was not going to say it out loud, not because it wasn't true, but because the man had already said it himself in his own words, and that was more useful than Elliot supplying the vocabulary for him. Elliot looked down the table at Diana. "You weren't asked to be here," he said. "Whose idea was it to bring you?" "Mine," she said. "I asked Mr. Whitfield if I could come." "Why?" She considered the question. She was not nervous, which Elliot noticed. She was the calmest person in the room other than Sandra. "Because I was there," she said. "And I think what happened shouldn't be described only by the people who were responsible for it happening." Sandra wrote something in her portfolio. Elliot nodded slowly. "What did you observe?" he said. "Everything that happened. From the beginning." She described it calmly, accurately, without editorial. The first dismissal when Elliot approached, the performances of checking the system, the call, the 14 minutes, the gets who came and went. And then she said, "When you told Mr. Whitfield who you were, I could see that he understood, and his first instinct wasn't to apologize, it was to explain. There's a difference." The room was quiet again. Elliot looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. "Here's what I want you to understand," he said, and he was talking to all of them, but his eyes moved to Cole and Whitfield as he spoke. "I've been in 100 rooms like this. I've been asked to verify myself in lobbies and boardrooms and parking lots and restaurants, and on the phone with people who called me back after they found out who I was and suddenly had a very different tone. I know what it is. I have spent 30 years building something. Not so that I can be immune to it, because I'm not and I never will be, but so that I have the standing to sit in a room like this one and say clearly, this is not acceptable, and it will not continue." He paused. "I'm not firing anyone today. That's not a mercy. That's a decision. Because if I fire you, someone else walks in your shoes tomorrow, and nothing actually changes. What's going to change is this property's training, its culture, and its accountability structure. Sandra is going to be in this building for the next 2 weeks. Every front desk staff member, every guest relations manager, every security contact is going through a full review. Not a seminar, not a video, a review. And at the end of that review, people will either demonstrate that they can do this job without making assumptions about who belongs here, or they won't be doing this job." He stood up. "Diana," he looked at her, "I'd like to speak with HR about your current role before I leave Nashville." She blinked once. "Okay, you have good instincts, and you were the only person in that lobby last night who treated me like a guest." He picked up his coffee cup. "That should mean something around here. I'm going to make sure it does." He walked to the door. He paused there for a moment with his hand on the frame, not for effect, but because there was one more thing that needed to be said. "Mr. Cole." Cole looked up. "The assumption you made last night cost you something," Elliot said. "Not your job, I told you that. But something. Make sure you know what it cost you. Make sure you don't forget what it felt like to sit in this room this morning. Because that feeling is what I walked into your lobby carrying every day of my life for 30 years. And I'm still here." He walked out. Sandra gathered her things. The room emptied. Diana sat for one more moment at the long oval table in the conference room that looked out at the parking structure, and she thought about the man who had walked into that lobby with mud on his boots and 14 minutes of patience and 30 years of something the hotel had tried, the night before, to turn away at the door. Then she stood up, straightened her badge, and went back to work. The Hargrove Grand, under new operating standards, opened its redesigned front desk training program 4 months later. Diana Osei was promoted to guest experience lead, a role that had not existed at the property before Elliot Bowen created it. Cole completed the accountability review and remained on staff. He was not the same man in November that he had been in July. That is not a small thing, even if it is a quiet one. Whitfield resigned in September. The letter he submitted cited personal reasons, which is what letters like that always say. Elliot Bowen did his quarterly walkthrough the next morning as scheduled. He wore the same boots. He carried the same duffel. He walked every floor, checked every corridor, ate breakfast in the restaurant without announcing himself, and left a tip in cash on the table. He did not stay for the ceremony of it. He never did. He drove back to Atlanta in the same gray truck, windows down, the kind of October light that makes Tennessee look like it was painted, and he called his daughter and told her the trip had gone well. "Did you handle it?" she asked. "We handled it," he said. "Same thing." "No," he said. "It really isn't." She laughed. He laughed too. Then the road opened up ahead of him, flat and long, and Elliot Bowen drove south into it, and the hotel he owned got smaller in the mirror behind him, and the morning held everything it usually holds, which is more than most people see if they bother to look.